Hey YouTube, it is Denise Matrenga as Pravase Beneo, create from flow. And today what I want to get into is essentially something that I've been seeing in the last few days. Just going over the Kybalion after watching Arwayne Steiger and seeing some other things and a lot of synchronicities. More when I was pondering the seven hermetic principles. I've already acknowledged and researched with them for quite a long time, but really just getting back on track with that kind of mindset. I did notice some things in particular. Just a number of things were lining up. So to start off with, if you look at the Big Bang, okay, the Big Bang was described as an infinitely hot and infinitely dense compression of matter or heat within a speck before bursting. Now, what else could do that? A black hole. We are living in the singularity of a black hole. But even greater, the singularity is a macrocosm to the horizon of the black hole itself, thus the plane of inertia. If the plane of inertia is the universe, and the plane of inertia in the 3D black hole is 2D, then to be in a 3D universe, the black hole had to be a 4D universe. And so I think that that relates completely to toroidal fields. If you look at the toroidal field of, for example, the Earth, or the toroidal field of our bodies, our consciousness, that it is analogous to this ever-changing, ever-becoming stature, and yet ever still. And so with the all being this infinite life mind, this spirit, that the all being the overall creator, being actually more than universe, that I think that the all is the only thing that is nothing. And I don't believe that I'm just saying this, I feel like it's a given, especially when you read the Kybalion and you acknowledge every piece of example that speaks of the all and speaks of nothingness. The only nothingness that can be, even with the ever-changing, is the all itself, because it only can create and become from the in-self. And that's why I think that it being infinite, it's within finiteness. And so maybe finiteness, because nothing exists, or it's non-existent, that is the thing that surrounds, or is the other part besides being something and nothing of the all, is finiteness. And that's why he's in the finiteness. Something and nothing are within the finiteness, and thus are infinite. And that's just a interesting thing for speculation. But to look at essentially starting off with the Caduceus. The Caduceus is a great symbol because it shows you exactly what I'm talking about. And what I mean is, think of Enki. Enki is essentially this Yahweh, not the Most High, but Yahweh. And he is bipolar. He is multiple personality disorder. He is narcissistic. He is, there's a number of names that you could place on Enki, but just to look, the Caduceus is a perfect example of that. You see the intertwining snakes, and you see that one of them is supposed to be good and the other one's evil in a very dualistic kind of mindset. And so, but then it also portrays within that, portrays what the good portrayed to the evil, just as in even the Lost Book of Enki would be Enki versus Satan or Enlil. And so Enki versus Enlil would be still this the Enlil mindset plus the benevolent mindset, and that is Enki. And then Enlil is just simply the Enlil mindset. Oh, well, you guys want to have sex all the time. I want to kill you. That kind of thing. And so this one's insane. This one, could see he's insane as well. Or losing his sanity, or accepting that he's losing his sanity, however you want to think of it. If you want to look at this, it's essentially a map called the Map of Baal, the Cult of Baal Map, sorry. And essentially, when you look at this map, it perfectly portrays what I'm talking about. You see the Canaanites descending to the pharaohs and to Babylon, Osiris and Nimrod. So, and you see the later Canaan are the Phoenicians, and the early Canaan are the Sumerians. And essentially, it does not talk about the Hebrews. Where are the Hebrews in this map? Where are they? I mean, it kind of makes sense because it's the cult of Baal, but I feel like they really do play a part in this map, because when you look at this, the Hebrew line followed the line of Shem. This is the line of Ham. The fourth son of the line of Ham is Canaan, and the Canaanites descend to the pharaohs and to the Babylonians, or yeah, Sumerians and so on. But apparently, if you look at this, they were the early ones were the Sumerians, and it descends into the kings of Babylon. Well, that doesn't really make sense, because the Babylonians went and took over the Sumerians, and so it kind of does. But I think that they are a different lineage, and that kind of putting them back together fills it back up, if you know what I mean. It aligns, it attracts it. It makes a reconciliation, and so whatever connection it aligns with. So Babylonians, Sumerians, if they're both Canaans, it would lead back to Canaans. That I think that it just, it's more like an amplified. You split up your potentials, because infinity divided by 2 is still infinity, right? And so when they're split up and they start becoming their own after a long time, you put them back together, and it's more of a larger potential of what the initial was in the first place, that kind of thing. And you can see that a number of things go down, but I don't disagree with this at all. I just see it as the Hebrew line is more like this is like twirling around between 2 snakes, between the pharaohs, or the Canaanites, and the Hebrew line of Shem. And so what I mean by that is, obviously, if you've read the Bible, but besides reading the Bible, the pharaohs even admitted that they were not the ones who built the Great Pyramids. And with that, who did? So if you look into the peoples of the Pre-Adamites, the Elongated Skulls, well, you can see a number of things. First off, sorry, Elongated Skulls. Okay, these Paracan skulls of Peru, right? So these people of these elongated skulls, right? The Olmecs. What did I talk about before? The Olmecs descended into the Incans and the Mayans, right? The Olmecs were of a dark skin. Who are the Olmecs? So if the Hebrews came into Egypt and built the Great Pyramids, But then according to not only fossil evidence and a bunch of other evidence, the Paracas went into these, went to build the Great Pyramids. And then they go from that, move on, and then get back into slavery once you see, if this will move back up. If you see right here, that this line right here, the pharaohs itself did not descend into the Roman Empire in the same way that it leads to the Vatican. That's what a lot of people do not understand. The Roman Empire, what happened in the Roman Empire was essentially a group of Hebrews to split off from their culture, and because they still believed in the science and everything, they just did not agree with the God that they were following, because they felt that they were following themselves and everything, and they were like, no, that's not all right. You need to follow this God that was of our ancestor Noah, that he followed out of fear, and Shem followed out of not only fear but also respect of his father, and that's why he said it was his God, his father's God. And so they split off essentially with Esau. He split off with a bunch of Hamites and descendants of Japheth. Japheth is in Greece, and Hamites as in typically African people, and not all African, especially not the ones that we call African Americans. There's a lot about them that are very historical, that are very much it's their birthright. You know, they have so much potential, and they've had so much suppressed knowledge, not only us but them especially. And just to get into this, it descends into here because the Egyptians, those who mixed with the Hebrews, because there was some mixing, that there was like kind of like they were there for a bit and then they mixed. And so that way, what does that mean? So there's a link between the pharaohs and the Hebrews. The Hebrews that split off were of that pharaohic descent. They descend into the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire descends, well, after they left and like split off, they split into, well, Britain and some other places. That's where you kind of get that map where it looks like we all migrated and at like 10,000 BC. That is essentially the same exact route that these essentially Jews got kicked out of Rome, out of the Roman Empire, because they started the whole mess, and then they were mad because they didn't want to like believe, like they didn't want to think about what happened. And so instead of like becoming Gentiles by joining another nation, they did that. And so they kicked out the Jews, which like is kind of a funny thing. And so those went to the Vatican, the Knights Templar, all these different things. And that's just besides like all the story that this tells. So I recommend that you check this out for yourself. It's called the Cult of Baal Map. Excuse me. You can get it on this guy's website, Dylan Luis Monroe. He's a very, very intricate guy when it comes to art and conspiracy and really good information. Perfectly lined it up for the Cult of Baal, of course, but that was the whole point. But when you go into this part, and that's where I agree, because if you look at Gnosticism, with the whole the world ruled by archons and the demiurge, and that's Abraxas and Yaldabaoth, and so on and so forth, and you can only redeem through esoteric gnosis and all this stuff. And that refers to the Nag Hammadi scriptures. The Nag Hammadi scriptures, that the way it descends in this sense is exactly That's what they believe. That's what the Egyptians that mixed with the Hebrews and then descended off and persecuted and all these things to them after they descended off. So essentially just literally just descended off, like almost like there wasn't a difference, but in how you would look at them, they looked the same, but it's kind of screwy. Anyways, and so the whole Gnosticism, the real Gnosticism follows the Kabbalians super well, because as soon as they followed this, where the world is ruled by archons and the demiurge, that follows into Christianity. And that's where a lot of this kind of this pit where a lot of people led themselves into. Not saying it's false, it's just how you interpret it, and also how your ancestors interpreted it, because those ideologies are not only compounded back onto you if you are taught by them, but also bred into you. So it's easier to go and bind to those because it's a potential that's been weaved into your biology. That's just simply because we have a consciousness, we have a mind, and we make constructs just as our body is a construct. And so because we constantly go back and forth between the DNA putting back onto us and us putting back onto our DNA, it embeds into our DNA. And so that's, I wouldn't say common sense, but yeah. So anyways, Gnosticism is very helpful. It's more realized that that the archons, they play a part, and they're almost like if you were to see all the other stuff, right, and you're coming from a part to where you're expanding from lower and transcending to higher, right? Wouldn't you observe from the lower until you transcend from the higher within an observational standpoint? Because that is what our mind does. And if our body was to reflect our mind in that process, which is already fractalizing because it already has to do with our mind from simply observation, that would not it start with the lower and dealing with that until you can transcend just as much as any mental configurations. That being said, I think that was the true mystery schools, and not saying they didn't have teachings, but when you look at stuff like this, I feel like it kind of points it out, because they pass that sort of mindset on, and then apparently the Knights Templar, I feel like I really need to do more research on them, because I have a misunderstanding of, at first they're good. Well, at first I thought they were bad. Then I thought they were good, because that's what I've concluded, and then they turned bad. And I've heard a number of things, but it all leads down to Masons and Jesuits. That's the thing. It's not whether or not they actually like infiltrated and took back. They had it the whole time. They had the Vatican the whole time. That's what a lot of people don't understand, or at least I feel they should understand, if that makes any sense. It's not that they took it back. They left it up so that the mind can be taken by those who were simply indoctrinated and indoctrinated themselves. So that way they had an ever revolving cycle, but then they were there to make sure it redirected to the same plot, the same conclusion. And then now they're just trying to sweep it over onto their plate. And, I really don't think it's going to get anywhere, because, Israel calling their independence, they are still bonded to the U.S. monetary system. Therefore, they can't call themselves independent, call themselves a nation, all that fun jazz. And the fact that they even tried, and when they did, there was bombs and all these things going on in the background, shows proof that it completely denies that they are. because as soon as they are to claim that, it's supposed to war and everything is supposed to end within the world, and I don't see that at all. In fact, besides, like, I mean, even though it's just, you know, fear mongering and just worship of Baal, essentially, with this whole like distraction game of the political system. A lot of people on both sides believe that there's going to be a civil war. So I'm not certain about that, but it is an interesting thing because, you know, like it denies all this like kind of nonsense. You know, they're not, I don't have anything against Jews, even though Jews might have something against my line being, well, the Hebrews that split off from here and then went through torture and tribulation, but did not go under them just yet, but still went through tribulation. Those who survived, and by survived, I mean their culture. Sorry, I don't know why I'm circling this. Oh yeah, maybe that's why subconsciously I'm thinking they split off from this one, not this one. And so essentially, those whose culture survived and didn't become Gentiles or didn't get lost necessarily right away, or lose their way at all, that they split off and kept on becoming stronger. And after a year, just advanced research, or I don't know if it was a year or generation, the Moors came into Sicily, Italy, and that's where my people come around. The whole thing with, yeah, I didn't even have to finish it. When Italians were blacks, the whole thing about these lines and whatnot, essentially, is that you see the whole checkerboard Freemason thing is that they're both black and white, right? So the Egyptians not being black per se, right? Even the ones that came and mixed with the Hebrews and then went back and all that fun jazz, like there's going to be stuff. Why am I clicking all these things? There's going to be some that are not, excuse me, that are not, that still look of one color or another, even though color doesn't exist, matter doesn't even exist. And so just as black applies to this race pertaining technically initially, right? I mean, because even the Hamites were dark. They were of a dark color of skin. And so the pharaohs and them going on into this whole schematic sequence of events, you can see that if some were dark, right, and people don't know of the dark ones, then once they find out that those ones are only that way because the true ones are dark, and that's why the dark ones are even hidden from within the whole Freemason checkerboard, while it's portrayed as whites. It's a canvas to hide the blacks, and then that's a canvas to hide the essentially the true Hebrews, and that's a canvas because they used it as a canvas because it was they already knew it was coming, essentially, one way or another, that there are whites that apply to this as well. And so the whole thing about essentially the Hebrews coming back within society to mix with the lost tribes of Israel. Went so that's the 10 lost tribes. So essentially, within the scriptures, it talks about the Hebrews going back to the 10 lost tribes. And so these 10 lost tribes, right, they are known as Iberian. And so if you look at the Iberian, what's the closest thing to Iberian? Hibernian. It's very close. So what is the Hibernian Peninsula? Hibernian, you don't even need to look at the peninsula to find out. Scottish, Ireland. But what does that mean? It also means that because Freemasonry is Scottish Rite Freemasonry, right? That just as every other time, they followed them. That's what they do. And so my people, an Albanian, essentially a lot of speculation leads towards Turkey, and then also the Vandals are portrayed as Black Germans, which is an interesting thing. A number of things. Either way, or not, the Moors are referred to as the Vandals, and so that apparently makes them the Black Germans, whatever that means to say. And so coming into Sicily, they were tribulated and all these things. 200 years with the Byzantine Empire, at the head of Byzantine Empire, and 200 years afterwards. And then during those second 200 years was when the Albanians, the Arbëreshi Albanians, came into Sicily. And these Arbëreshi Albanians, or Arbëreshi, essentially they held off. And when you look at these eagles, you can know it's already, it's a what's it called? It is a group. There is a name for that. Essentially, that is a common symbol on a flag. It is a marker to link to things, and so there's this whole diaspora. They come into Sicily, and they wait, and then after the 200 years in the 1600s, then they mate with the Albanians. And what this is they're essentially part of the 10 lost tribes, the Arbëreshi. That was the whole diaspora, because as soon as they saw something was up, because everything was fine, and then once a certain ideology of system came around, then they realized that the way that their country was leading, whatever, that they were going in a dark direction according to their understanding and belief. So they split off, and these people are the ones that stick to the plan and waited until they got to, voila, Sicily, and did not mate with all the neighboring countries. And so what does this mean? So first off, transfiguration, right? So it's from this black into white, just because they still are that descent. They just took on another country's color. And then coming into Sicily, they are essentially the inverse to these Egyptians. These Egyptians being peoples that came and did this binding to make themselves stronger, but also make themselves darker, not in a physical extent, in a very mental extent. And so, and that's also why I think they got paler, because they were all dark, right? They got dark. They were able to get darker than the people before them, right? So you get darker than the people before you because you are initially pale, and after 5 generations or so, you look exactly like them. But because you are putting that on top of you with the feminine on top of that is just layers. And so essentially you can get darker just as dark people can get lighter after 5 generations of a certain race of mixing. They can get lighter than that race. And so that's where I see this Roman Empire again. They split off from the Middle East. They go into Britain. Then the lighter ones of Britain, and not the rich, the poor, even though they were in Freemasonry, split off, made their way as the Masons into the US of A. And so essentially, when you see that these ones are much lighter, and then the ones that split off into the KKK are even lighter than those, that, you know, it kind of just, it points it out. It says all that needs to be said, that they were initially dark and now they're not, and they played into a system that they're being played by now, at least. And so, you know, when you look at this whole Egyptian line, they do this, they become stronger in a physical extent, they attain more power in the physicality in relation to their mentality, being they have confidence, but they can be really pussies. You know, they have ability to really draw power off of kind of Baal stuff. You know, and when you look at that and just going down the line, that, you know, it's kind of just sucks. It's sad, because it's not getting anywhere. It doesn't lead to anywhere. It's just kind of a waste, because, you know, they think that they're doing it from a belief that it'll take them to you know, get to this dimension in which whole CERN is about getting to the invisible dimension, so that way they can reign over that. That's not how it works. You know, the whole entire duality basis, it's this whole finite thing and whatnot, and that, or the finite parts of it, like even these structures that it gives the basis of essentially just not fitting in the picture. And so they fall down from their state, and then they wish to do all these heinous acts within the spiritual kind of perspective. And then within the physical realm, they work themselves up until they can build a tower and get off into this invisible dimension. They're saying once they input a portal, they're either going to wait for something to go through or send something out. That something is their system. They're just trying to send themselves into it. And so if you send yourself into that part of the existence from a physical construct, even though it's not separate from the physical construct, you know, like physicality isn't supposed to equate within such a realm. You know, you look at these toroidal fields, and if you see as these planetary toroidal fields are guided by an over larger sum of just, when you look at galaxies, hold up, okay, yeah, look at galaxies, what are you looking at? You know, you're making an observation, and there's relationships between all the whole microcosm and the macrocosm, right? And there's a black hole at the center of every galaxy. Okay, so it's filled with planets and solar systems and all that fun jazz, right? So what is this layer, or these layers, that give a illustration such as this? You know what I'm saying? It's what I'm stating is that the overlying consciousness that of these planets have, saying the observation leads into consciousness having observation, and then some oversight thing having consciousness, and then something having that, and so on and so forth, until you get into these systems and then the relationships between them, such as dark matter and dark energy, right? The all being way more than all those relationships of dark energy, dark matter, and just regular matter. That even more than this, that when you see inside of all that ever expanding, it is just in that relation between each galaxy is analogous to neurons when connected. So the physical representation of neurons is like binding time to space, to physical existence, to represent a construct that takes time. And so that's where a lot of this infinite stuff comes into fruition, especially in relation of a paradoxation between us and the mind of God. This is just the mind of God. And so if this 3D universe inside of a 4D black hole is the mind of God, well, then wouldn't the 4D black hole be the physicality of God? Or would it just be that the 3D universe inside of the 4D black hole would be essentially as the consciousness in relation to the pineal or something of that sort, like fractals? And so thus the pineal in relation to the body, but also it's in relation to the brain, right? So that would be the universe inside of which it is in. So would the body of God be the 5D black hole, or so on and so forth? Or it could even be the relationship. That is something of relative perspective. It is an interesting concept to ponder upon, but the all is ever consuming. So the more you expand it, the more it expands, because it only illustrates you and the ability to expand, because from its state of nothingness in which it does expand, and which you are contained within a fractal within it, and are as a tool for observation, it observing within itself from it's from an equilibrium within this plane of inertia that is this horizon of this black hole. You're just a tool. And so as much as your mind is to expand and encompass the universe and beyond and so forth, that no matter how much you go beyond, that is to illustrate a simple task in relation to the universe or to the all itself. And with that, if you are able to go beyond and simply observation from within is what the all is able to use as a means for it expanding for itself, then simply you being as a tool and you being able to go beyond, then does that make you illustrated enough to, even though you can never become the Most High, does not that illustrate you as a God? You already know you're in the image of one, but it has it right there. And people don't understand the tool, the power of their mind. Really, it is limitless, and all the bounds that are held within it. You can look at space, the properties of space. They say that there are no properties, but the properties of space are simply that, it has a lack of relationship between things. It has a relationship, but it works as a bound. So because of that lax system that works as a bound, you can see that lax systems are the things within us as a reflection that work as bounds. And they can encompass the the small fragments of the neurons, such as planets, such as solar systems, even up to the neurons, even up to the connections between the neurons. So these lax systems, we need to, it's almost like, not that that they actually are separate, but that we observe them as separate, as a thing to illustrate to us in our task to do, that we need to separate the lax systems. So that way, when they disintegrate from lack, and you can expand the mind, that there are no bounds, such as hate, fear, all these lower feelings, or even just when it sums up to it, it's just the ego. And when you see that, the empty space, even though the property of it may seem as a bound, it really isn't, because it's ever expanding and all this fun stuff, but also it withstands the relationship between all of these things. And so really that is what you can see, that even though there is a relationship between galaxies making neurons, that there is a relationship already between them, such as this dark energy, such as this dark matter, that leads back to this source, the Big Bang source. Bang source. And so if we are essentially a rainbow of light, right? If within a black hole, imagine a black hole, horizon. Okay, so if we are a black hole, or in a black hole, see, then you take this spark and you illustrate that as simply being like that plane of inertia, as sort of a prism of light spreading into all of its colors. And yet it is simply almost as an image held within the mind, or a song or a hymn continually being played out and expanding its nets and all that fun jazz, that we are so much more connected. And if your body soon follows after your mind, and you can withstand the interpretation and continually build beyond this illustration, before this, beyond this, and that it will continually encompass you because of the cycle of information that you've encompassed along the way and trusted upon, that it will reimburse you, that within that cycle, that once you get beyond this and once you still embody more, what does that mean to say for your body that follows? After we get to a point in time where a collective understanding gets so large, it obviously will not only expand past our world of interpretation, but observation and interaction. You can only do anything that you will to do from the consciousness in which you illustrate within your being, that also illustrates the world in relation to your mind. So it also states that you're only a droplet of this already all source. So when you divide infinity by 2 or whatever, it still makes infinity. So you're still part of that. You're just a different fragment, a different observation. Even if there are groups to say combine back together, so that you can communicate even beyond this physical realm, so to speak. And I think that is something to leave off with. I think that it is something great to ponder on. Just the path in which you see your highest self on, you see your will and your passion, and you continually making your way up it, and you get the wings. you find exactly what you need, and it always comes back to you. You set the course, you set the goal, you set the structure, you hold the structure within a belief, and then you make an action and illustration of cause, which is an effect to the schema or ideology in which you made, and in effect the cause or the effect in relation to that being a cause is thus holds within it that schematic presence, and it thus illustrates to go well beyond and spread off and create anew, and already having that reimbursement factor within the ideology, within the intent, within the structure of energy itself, before releasing it and before illustrating whatever it is, you receive more, because the more you receive, the more you have to share. And that way, when you reimburse yourself back within this process, you can not only get people even farther beyond, but yourself farther beyond, so that you can get even more people farther beyond, and so on and so forth, into the fractal of which that represents. Again, in whatever path, passion, or whatever you set your mind to, with this whole superconscious experiment in which we are in, and also we put ourselves in, and also we are of and yet not in, and makes us expand more beyond. And I really just want to leave you guys with that, because I think that it is very much just illustrates a lot of things, and I really should go. So I appreciate your audience, and give me lots of comments, a lot of shares, subscribes, likes, dislikes, any information that you can add to this table. I would love it. Please give that thumbs up, and I appreciate your attention and you being here with me, and peace.